Hello and welcome to the Responder Life with
Molly
and Victoria. We are super excited to be joining you today. I am one of your hosts and co-creators of the Responder Life. My name is Victoria Hess. I am a disaster responder, and humanitarian is the umbrella term I go by most often. And I've been working in the field for the last 5-ish years. I did some work with refugees internationally for a little bit, and then I moved back to the US, and I've been working in the domestic nonprofit humanitarian responder disaster scene ever since, and actually met Mollie on a disaster. Mollie, introduce yourself to the people.
Hi, I am Mollie Tinnin. I have been a disaster responder also for about 5 years. I started off in the private sector as a safety professional. That's what my bachelor's and master's are in, and ended up also working for Red Cross in the biomedical field for their blood donor services. And then during COVID, when people were not really volunteering, people were afraid to go out, there was so much confusion. It was such a horrific, it was a bad experience for everyone. I think I still go to therapy for that. I came across over into the disaster services side, and I just kind of really found myself through working with disaster survivors. I no longer work for Red Cross. I no longer work in the nonprofit sector, but I'm still very heavily involved in disaster response, preparedness, and really all phases.
And I think we've got a lot of good things that we've learned over the years, and we're hoping to do that with you. And as a disclaimer, before we jump into this, as we are working professionals in this field, what we talk about on this podcast does not necessarily represent the views of our employers. They are our own views, and do not take them as the representative of our employers. We are private citizens at this moment. I think that's the best way I can phrase it. So why a podcast? Well, we've been talking actually about doing a podcast for the last several years because
like 3 years.
Off and on.
Yeah.
Basically, we want to be a space for people to have something to listen to. I can't even tell you how many hours working in this field. I live in Western North Carolina, and there are a lot of beautiful mountain roads. And in that, I spend a lot of time on them. I spend many hours a week on.
I apologize for my service dog. His name is Charles. And while he will not frequently be on the podcast, he will sometimes join, but as he is my service dog, he is not used to being away from me.
We are currently recording this in my office/guest room.
That one's your dog.
That one is my dog. But so back to why a podcast. So we both, I think one of the things that people underestimate working in response is how much time you spend in a car or in other sort of transit where you're just kind of in movement going somewhere. And so I think a podcast is a great way for us to connect with other people who, like us, work as responders in disaster or other types of crises, because you spend a lot of time sitting in a car.
I also felt like I was not adequately prepared or trained for the work that I do. I have yet to find a responder toolkit or anything that gives an adequate shopping list of what you need to buy and pack to go with you. We aren't staying in normal situations. I have stayed in staff shelters, hotels, but no one really seems to have mastered putting together a list of things that are actually beneficial to the responder, or how to deal with working and living with your coworkers. So we wanted to bring a podcast and social media spaces that would help people adequately prepare. So we also are on Amazon. We also, have packing lists. We actually have all of this stuff that we've been building. And, this is a podcast for responders by responders. So we hope to fill in the gaps where program areas and organizations and everyone has missed, and to bring people together from different VOAD, state, local, federal agencies who do this work. Because while we may be doing different things in disaster and doing it in different capacities with different organizations, we're still all connected. It is a very small community. You know,
for sure.
When you demobilize and you say, see you on the next one, like it's kind of a joke, but it's really not, because it really is kind of a small community. So this is a space to stay connected, to find readiness materials. And if you're somebody who is thinking about being a disaster responder, this is for you as well. There's not really a standardized definition out there of who is a responder. It's not just the people on the scene. It's not just the people working in person at the mass care shelters or at the EOCs.
Emergency Operations Centers.
Yes,
there's a lot of acronyms. And
we are an acronym heavy field.
I would say just by and large too. And also for responders, while we have a lot of experience in the domestic disaster scene, this could also be used with other people working in humanitarian crises, whether it's, the major players in the field. I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head, and it's very difficult to think of them.
Truck drivers.
I mean, there's a lot of people who can fall into this, and also it doesn't always have to be in the ways that we have had our personal experience.
Right.
And hopefully at some point we'll bring in some people who have other experiences than just ours, because
we want to introduce opportunities for working with disaster survivors. Whether you're deploying in person, whether you're supporting it virtually, whether you are a truck driver who is delivering supplies to a disaster area, whether you are donating financially to nonprofits to help, or whether you are donating blood for those survivors who are going to need medical procedures to recover from injuries sustained, whether you are volunteering to write grants, whether you are, medical field, mental health,
or even a family member supporting somebody who is in this field, because we can't do it by ourselves. I think one of my favorite things to talk about in this space is the disasters and any other type of crises. It's like a puzzle, and every single organization and player and responder adds their piece to the puzzle. You can't solve the entire puzzle and be all of the pieces for everything. But, you can do what you're good at and you've got experience in, and what your job role is. Not necessarily going outside of that. That's something we'll talk about in the future, because definitely a hot topic of people in this field knowing what your job is.
Lane in emergency management a lot better than I do when I'm driving, if you know what I mean.
And if you don't stay in your lane, you're going to hear about it quite loudly from somebody who may not be in the best of moods, in my experience. Hopefully we're not going to be having that happen, but it is something that could happen.
It could. It's happened to me.
Especially when people are in crisis and they're dealing with stressors that they normally wouldn't be as hard with. But
and we'll talk about coping. We'll talk about mental health. We'll talk about all of that. Nothing is.
And for awareness, we have our dogs both outside of this office area. I've got a golden retriever. Her name is Juniper. You will probably hear me yell at her frequently. And Mollie's got Charles.
And it's important to me that Charles is not always on duty. Charles is a dog. Yes, he keeps me alive, but he also needs to play with other dogs and learn that he is a dog, because I don't think at this point he thinks he is a dog. But that's another thing that we will talk about. We are very pro diversity, equity, inclusion. In fact, we're probably going to dedicate a whole entire session to that. There are some ICS courses out there for including people with disabilities and disaster responses. I'm one of those people. And so deploying for me kind of looks a lot different in the support that I need to deploy. But so maybe you're thinking and you're like, I really want to get back. I really want to get out there and I want to help, but I'm not sure if I can. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about, preparing yourself for that. Really nothing is off limits.
There might be some things off limits, but realistically, we're going to be talking about
the
everything.
Only things that are off limits that will get me fired. And then maybe when I retire, we'll talk about that.
You can do that. We'll be talking about everything, basically.
I'm going to write a book one day, but I'm going to it'll be published posthumously. Yeah, after it'll be posted
After she's dead.
After I'm dead, so I can't get in trouble for the things that I say.
Yeah. We'll dig into that at some other point.
We really just want this to be like a casual space, casual conversation, things that matter. September is Preparedness Month. Like, I really want to get into preparedness because, we can't respond if we're not prepared ourselves. I say that I'm talking to myself.
I have to remind myself that too on the regular.
I really want to experiment with cooking with canned goods, and that's something we're going to bring over into like our YouTube channel.
We've got a lot of ideas.
We have a lot of ideas.
Starting at where we're at the moment, and you'll find us on social media. And as we figure out what these things look like within the responder life, and hopefully you as a community can provide feedback on what you want to see.
Yes.
And we'll see what we can do to either bring guests or leverage our connections in our communities to add what the team or what the field, what our responders are wanting to see and look for. So I think we've kind of talked about a lot of stuff already about what we're wanting to do into the future. I think one of the things I'm hoping to do is we're going to talk about a sip of the day. I am currently drinking water. I was earlier drinking a chai tea latte, but it got way too late for me to be drinking that as I was trying to figure out how to use podcast equipment, which was a lot more complicated than it should have been.
I'm drinking cranberry juice because I'm in poor health.
And also, I poured that for myself initially, but...
No, I asked for the cranberry juice.
I thought you said no for it, but...
And, poured me water, and I don't want
it. It's all good.
So refreshing.
I mean, it's a cran pomegranate, so I think it tastes better than the other kinds of pomegranate cranberry juices.
I know that there was more kinds.
Good. There's a whole aisle of them, basically, whenever you go to the grocery. One of the things you're going to learn as we go through this process is that we are currently in person with each other, which is why you're hearing us talk about cranberry juice more intensively than we probably would otherwise. So we're not going to always be in person. Somehow, there's been some excitement happening in Western North Carolina in the last several months in the response phase, disaster space. I prefer to not have this in my area. So in normal days of what I do, I support my local volunteer team, and I cover a lot of the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains, and the area I support was heavily impacted by Helene. Luckily, I don't support Asheville as part of my geography that I manage, but definitely got a lot more of a close brush with local response initiation compared to normal, which definitely brought in all of the help and all of the support. A lot of times when a big disaster comes in, everybody says, oh, the circus is coming to town.
I'm the circus.
She's the circus. I am not the circus. I prepare for a circus, but I have never been more ready for a circus in my life after the first, let's say 72 hours of right before Helene impact, into the Helene impact, and right after. Having everybody you need to get a hold of lose communications is not it. We don't want to do that again. It was awful.
So I currently reside in Louisiana, but currently right now I am supporting disaster operations in South Carolina. So we're actually pretty close, which is nice because, they're big states, but we ended up being super close to each other. So spending my days off with Victoria, which is nice because we're best friends, but we typically are
very long
texters and talkers and don't get to spend that much time together. So for now, we will be recording together. And then later on, I don't have a setup as nice as this where I live, but I'm also never home. So you'll get to see...
Literally, your job is not being home.
Yeah, so you'll get to see some hotel. But I also look forward to showing you how I set up my hotel rooms as well, because maybe you want to do this long term like I do, but you're not sure how that looks. So that is definitely, I'm going to put together some lists. I'm going to call them the edits of the travel supplies and stuff that I bring along with me to make my life as homey as possible. So we both have very much different experiences in how we do disaster. So you'll get to hear about both sides, and both of them are just as valuable, just as mission oriented, and how you do disaster is up to you.
It's within the constraints that you're working with, because the last thing we need in disasters are cowboys and people who go places without permission or people knowing where you're at.
That is true. The one thing that we do not support is people who self-deploy.
No.
But we'll talk about that. We'll probably do an entire podcast on that.
For sure. That is a hard no. No, yes. Thank you. But yeah, so Mollie does a lot more of the active response and getting out there in the field when the big things happen. You know, that's not for everybody. I mean, I like doing that for a 2-week deployment or something like that once a year, maybe twice a year if we're feeling a bit fancy. My big deployment of this year was sleeping at home and spending a lot of time in a car, a company vehicle, going and supporting my communities I work with every single day. And so there's a lot of ways you can get connected to help your communities and be a responder that don't have to be glamorous. Even if you're just doing something that helps with organizing and doing online work for getting scheduling in order, that makes a huge difference in the readiness to respond and the way that we can execute and support our communities in the face of disaster, whatever that may look like in what you're dealing with, if you're working in the disaster space or any other type of crisis and emergency that people are in. So
I said no to like one deployment request ever.
Yeah. And that was because you wanted to hang out with me.
Yes, it was. I also, I got a deployment request to go to Oklahoma for the tornadoes. It was I guess it was a couple of years now.
You can look at the poster right there.
The Eras tour, yeah. We went to the Eras tour. And I got deployed like 2 days before we were supposed to go to the Eras tour. And, so I told the head of the disaster, who thankfully is a very good friend now. So shout out Adam, if you ever listen to this podcast. I said that I wasn't feeling well. So I asked if I could work from home until I felt better for a couple days. And, then I kind of snuck on an airplane and went to Atlanta. Thankfully, you can buy internet on the plane, so nobody knew. We went to the Eras tour. It was phenomenal. Yes, we are Swifties. She's more of a Swiftie than I am. I'm kind of a low-key.
Used to be low-key, and then I now live by myself. And so I can release all of the teenage angst about being a Swiftie.
But I don't really put teenage angst and Taylor Swift together. That's more of a My Chemical Romance. But you do you.
Slightly different age group on that.
I'm older by a lot.
Not that much.
Enough that when I make references to my childhood, you don't get them.
That is correct. I also grew up very sheltered and in the middle of freaking nowhere. So, and I'm the oldest child. I definitely have oldest child tendencies, and I'm sure that will become very apparent. But yeah,
But we did. We went to the Eras tour and I snuck there. And then I actually got a kidney stone while I was here. And so I snuck back home, and then I secretly had surgery to break up the stone, and then got on an airplane and went to Oklahoma, and then was overheard talking about how great the Eras tour was over the weekend by the head of the disaster. Thankfully, he wasn't mad, and his only response was that I had bad taste in music because he's a Five Finger Death Punch fan. You know what? To each their own. So I did get to enjoy the Eras tour, and it was well worth faking being sick.
Yeah, and then you actually ended up being really sick.
Yeah, I mean, literally, I did actually get sick. I almost forgot about that. Every time I come to North Carolina, I get deathly ill.
Didn't we have to call 911 and you went to the ER?
Yeah, and then when I came and visited you a few weekends ago, when I got back to South Carolina, I had to call 911 and go to the hospital. There must be something about this state.
I hope that trend does not continue because we'll be hanging out a lot more in person.
Exactly. And I don't know how many more times I can get sick and live through it.
True that. But back to what we're going to be doing here in the Responder Life, I'm super excited. I think we're also going to be something that's very interesting too, I would say, in recent history, going back to Helene and all of the hurricanes, because hurricanes are a heavy hitter in the disaster space. It's interesting to see how the planning, as you get more familiar, if you aren't in the field yet, as you enter into it. I never thought I would care so much about the weather. I mean, I grew up on a farm, so I heard a lot about the weather, but I care about the weather in a very different way now than I used to. But basically, it's very interesting the longer you're in the field, the amount of planning ahead of time that you prefer for things. I used to be a lot more spontaneous, but now I like to have things planned ahead. if possible.
That is true. And you know what? Maybe if you are just listening to this and you've experienced disasters, I'll say my mental health took a nosedive during Helene and Milton due to the misinformation that was out there about what we were and we were not doing on the response phase. Because the work that I did started pre-landfall, and I worked 14 days in a row, 12-hour days, and then part of night shift as well. And I know for me, it was hard to get up and go to work every day thinking that, or hearing, not just thinking, seeing all of the stuff across social media saying what people weren't doing for the communities. And, we see a very small amount in the media of what disaster is. You might see pictures of people reuniting puppies with their owners. And while those are great feel-good stories, that is the rare side of disaster. That's not what a lot of us are doing. There are really, really sad stories. There are things that don't go well. When you think of normal work environment from a safety standpoint, since that's what I do, we try to make tasks and that are repeatable. We don't think about building tasks in workplaces, plants and stuff where there's a lot of room for flexibility in how you do your job or what the task is. But when it comes to disasters, if you've been to one disaster, you've been to one disaster. We can't control the size of the disaster. We can't control what community it hits. We can't control what resources that community has. So as repeatable as our jobs are, there's a lot that's not repeatable. And it's a lot about communication and collaboration and quick thinking. I came from a world where it was all about OSHA regulations and everything was black and white. Disasters, it's not black and white. There's a lot of gray. There's a lot of opportunities to come up with new best practices, or there's a lot to evaluate and experience and take away from what you're doing at that point in time, and keeping it in the corner of your brain. And when you experience something similar, say, oh, hey, I responded to such and such disaster and this worked really well. I do a lot of organizing building evacuations, and I always ask them, what have you experienced in other disasters that worked really, really well? I don't need to come up with something new. I need to come up with something that works and quickly. It's a unique space to work and live in.
Yeah, and I'll also say too, going back to what you were talking about with the media, it is amazing how much of the just a little bit of what happens in the field on a disaster makes it to the media, social media or otherwise. And not all the stories that we experience and we see should be shared with the media. It's not for everyone. Being in the field during disasters like Hurricane Helene is not for everyone. It's not easy. And a lot of times, one of the worst things you can do in the decision-making process is to take too long to make a decision because you want it to be perfect. It has taken me a long time to really understand that more fully. You need to exercise strategic patience, which I hope I'm getting better at as the longer I'm in this field. I used to be a lot more like, oh man, something's happening, let's run in and we'll do it really quickly. But taking that step back as strategic patience to make that decision, really important. But one of the challenges I had, especially with Helene, because I jinxed myself a little bit with Helene, one of the disasters that happened right when I started with my team here in Western North Carolina was Tropical Storm Fred. If you're not from North Carolina or in Western North Carolina, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about with Tropical Storm Fred. But if you know, you know, and you probably also had a lot of fun with Helene if you know. But we were using that as our work plan that we were thinking about in our reference points for looking at Hurricane Helene until, when I found out one of my counties was bringing swift water teams in, I'm like, this is not going to be good. Y'all don't do swift water teams. And then they had like 30 feet of water go down the main road. But I told one of my bosses, I was talking with her, and it was like, yeah, I think we're in a pretty solid spot, and I think we're more well prepared. And then we dealt with everyone losing communications. I heard we had a ground stop, and then I couldn't get a hold of my bosses for like 2 days. And decisions had to be made, and they had to happen. And I think the other piece that's really important when we're looking at what it means to be a responder, we're collaborating and working with other people. It's also the importance of having a team that you know and you trust that has your back. I could not have survived the first 2 to 3 weeks of Helene without having a great team. I did almost lose my sanity for a couple of times. But
Isn't Charles lovely?
He's so wonderful. Like, ended up calling my brother because I was on my way to a shelter site that was opening and I couldn't ask any clarifying questions. I was just told, get there and get your team there. I had a bunch of bottled water in my car and I was on my way to the shelter and I was hysterically crying. It's not funny, but it was a really good way for me to let all of the everything out before I had to be the person who is doing things, which if you gotta make sure you have that safe place to do that, by the way, if you're in this field, because you can't take everything on, because that's not healthy and it's not good for you. And you can't stay in this field if you don't look at it like a long game. Yeah, I could push myself really hard for 2 weeks and just do everything for everyone. But I only have 2 weeks to give at that end, and then I am done. See you later. Actually, I'll never see you again because I'm gone. This was too hard. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind, as well as responders. And what we're doing is to be really aware of, are we doing this in a sustainable fashion? Because you can't say yes to everything, because that's a great way to lose your mind and also to not help people in the long term. So keeping in mind what the goals of what you're doing is, as well as how can my skill set fit into the space of what's needed, and who else can I invite to the table? Who else can I be working with? Because, Mollie and I met on a disaster. Legitimately, we were knocking on people's doors and
We had death threats.
we did. And it was Thanksgiving.
It was Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving of 2020.
Yeah, and this man followed us around for like days afterwards, and we were sure we were going to get murdered. Like, he was dead set he was going to murder us.
But the highlight of the day was our takeout Waffle House, because we couldn't eat in Waffle House because of COVID. And so we ate it in our hotel lobby. And that was the highlight of the day.
It was like the best meal, though.
It
I don't know if I was just hungry because, I like Waffle House. Like, I will eat there. But I don't think I've ever had a better Waffle House meal than I did that Thanksgiving.
We earned it.
We did.
It was a wild
So
time.
Waffle House, if you're listening, we are big fans.
We are big fans of your
hash browns, your loaded hash browns. That is what I am a fan of.
I haven't done a whole bunch of Waffle House, but also keep in mind, I'm originally from the Midwest. Even though there are Waffle Houses near me now that I live in North Carolina, it's just not a place you go to when you're by yourself, really.
I do.
I mean, I would go by myself if I was traveling, but if I'm at home, I'm going to make my food at home.
I'm also a fan of Uber Eats.
So
the hardest thing for me about being away from home is having access to good quality food. If somebody wants to cook for me and I'm in your area, I will not say no. Will not.
As long as you're not making food that she's allergic to.
I am definitely allergic to gelatin. I had an allergic reaction, and this will be a story for a different podcast, but I did almost die during Hurricane Ida in the EOC. It was EOC for one of the parishes and not actually the state, but I did have an allergic reaction while Ida was on the ground and ambulance service was suspended, and things happened quickly, and it all went downhill.
I mean, it also helped that you knew some people to make things happen,
which is how you end up trauma bonding with the people you work with. I have friends that I've known my entire life, but I'm not closer with anybody than the people I do disasters with. It is a unique family.
Yeah. And I don't think it, and not necessarily family in like your workplace is your family in a toxic way. It's when I make references to things, for example, I was at church and I was talking about my job and I made a joke about disaster. And if you weren't if you didn't know that I work in disaster, it sounded like I'm a very terrible person, which I don't think I am most of the time. And they were looking at me like, oh, that's so terrible. And I'm like, for clarification, I work in disaster response. And they're like, that makes a lot more sense why you're saying that. But it's definitely, I would say a lot of it is a lifestyle, because sometimes you get calls in the middle of the night with urgent issues that need to be taken care of. For example, this weekend, I thought it would be a lot more chill than it has been, but I've been on calls today, and it is a Saturday when we are recording this, to solve some problems with winter weather issues. But, I've got
I worked this morning for a few hours.
work this morning.
I did. I didn't care for it. I was tired.
Yeah.
I'm still tired.
You're always tired.
That's fair.
But yeah, I think we've got a lot of really cool things that we're going to be bringing your way. And if you have any suggestions on what you'd like to hear from us, please let us know. We are very good yappers. I think anybody I work with who's not on my podcast, I make a joke about being a chatty person, and they're like, "Yep, that's correct." And I like to talk. I try to be conversational about my talking too, because otherwise I can get I'm a really good squirrel chaser. Very good at that. Almost as good as my dog. She's a lot faster than I am. What?
I'm the quiet one.
I don't feel like you're super quiet though.
I'm not super quiet, but like you can like make friends with anybody. I can't. Like I feel like I've met my friend quota. So like if I like do put an effort out there, like I hope somebody realizes how special that is. Because it's rare. It was rare. I was there.
You remember it all too well?
I do.
But yeah, I will say I am a very friendly person, which has led me well, having moved to multiple continents by myself, only knowing one or two people. Yes, I did that twice, and I have lived in multiple countries. Before I got into disaster response, I was a teacher, and that's what I trained to be. And I did a year teaching, and I was like, cool, I like to teach people things, but I do not want to do this for the rest of my life. Let's find something new. And then I found humanitarian work, and I absolutely love what I do, which means I work a lot because I love what I do. But I'm going to try and find more balance, because I got to do more things that make me happy. I mean, working makes me happy most of the time, but doing more things outside of work that bring me joy, because I think a problem that a lot of people have in our career is your hobby is helping people in disaster, helping people in crisis, and it's also your job. So having like something that you do outside of that's why everybody knows I'm a Swiftie I work with, because it's like, okay, if I didn't do this as my job, I would be like, I was a volunteer before I became an employee and a working professional in this field. And, when it starts out as your hobby, it has a tendency to be a lot more difficult to
let go
and not be on, because you get really excited about it. But at the same time, it's also important that we have balance, and hopefully this can be a safe place for people to have those conversations. And if you have any cool hobbies, let us know that you can do, especially while you're out and about. I love to read as my other hobby. I think the bookshelf wallpaper behind us says a lot.
I'm a national parker. I don't know if that's really a term, but
you visit the national parks.
I do. That is my thing when I'm traveling. I visit national parks with my service dog. We did Gettysburg last year. We did Congaree, we did the St. Louis Arch, and I have this like national parks passport, and like it's like a whole thing. So some of that will be on the social media as well. Some things to take your mind off the work when you do get a day off. My goal this year is to learn how to make friendship bracelets that say things like, it's in the IAP. Or I had a coworker
incident action
plan. And then I was working in Pennsylvania, and we were doing assistance in disaster recovery centers. And when we ended up closing those down at the end of the application period, one of the ops guys said to me, when I demobilized, he said, I'll DRC you later. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to put that on a bracelet. So
That's incredible.
so my goal is to make disaster friendship bracelets, because it's kind of a little bit of my Swifty self, but also into my disaster self. So if you happen to see me out in the field someday, please come introduce yourself and I will give you one of my friendship bracelets.
Assuming she has any on her.
No, I will. I promise. I will never go anywhere without
Unless
these.
you run out.
I just held myself accountable. Now I actually have to make these bracelets. What if I run out? Well,
you have more supplies in your backpack, and when you're sitting in an EOC, supposed to be paying attention
I don't go to EOCs anymore.
Oh, that's right. But when you're on a Teams call or other type of virtual meeting and you're listening to people talk, you can be making friendship bracelets to keep your hands busy.
There's an oddly a lot of people in the area that I work that like to have on-camera Teams meetings.
I like to be on camera for.
I do not.
Depends on the meeting and the group of people.
No, I'm a multitasker. I don't want, and
if it's a big meeting, no cameras.
Like, I understand the expectation that like you don't have any distractions and you're not multitasking, but in the real world, like the emails don't stop because you decided to have a 2-hour Teams meeting.
And also that in that 2-hour Teams meeting, I probably get like several calls or text messages at the same time with problems to solve. And it's like, do you want me to be fully attentive to this meeting? Or do you want me to solve the problems you pay me to solve?
Yes.
Because I like to frame it as, we keep things at a steady pace, because I don't work in the response mode all the time. We keep things at a steady pace all the time. But we know what happens when something happens of whatever scale it might be. The area I support, we had 3 tornadoes last year in the first 6 months of the year, which was not a good time. And then you also, and these are all small disasters, not the big ones that are fancy on the news or remembered beyond the local communities for very long, because
they should be. Did you know? The more that we talk about disasters, specifically a specific disaster or an area, the more popular that it becomes, the more likelihood there is that other nonprofits will come in and help. Because although they wish they could go help everybody, what earns them having donors is that they are in areas that are broadcasted all over the media nationwide, which is unfortunate. We should be going to every city and every disaster, but unfortunately we live in a time where disasters are much bigger than they used to be, much more frequent than we used to be. So it's really important to keep that in the media, whether it's the organizations posting it, the local news media, or just the number of people who are hashtagging it on social media. We all play a role in keeping these things in the media so that people can get as much help as possible.
And also, the small disasters are a great way to know what to do when there's a big disaster, because the last thing we need beyond self-deployers, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, is we need untrained people going out and thinking they can do things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yes.
That is.
And we need younger people to get interested in disaster response. We are largely, responders are getting older because it is a hard thing to get into, especially being able to tell your employer, hey, I'm leaving for 2 weeks to go do something, or however long that deployment is. So, we're also going to use this space to help younger people who want to get into disaster response and emergency management, get into that, learn how to have conversations with your employer about wanting to do it. Yeah. Maybe you want to talk about resume writing, whatever it is. How do you
actually get into this field as your career? Because holy cow, is it difficult to get in as your career.
Getting your foot in the door is really difficult when it comes to disaster response.
Because you also want to make sure you've got qualified people who get through the door, not just people who are like having the feel-good moment, which we all have our starting point. But I think that's definitely something we can talk about too, because I'll say too, for the age of responders, most of the volunteers I work with, we make jokes about this. So it's a regular commentary. I make jokes about the fact that they could be my grandparents because I am the literal age of their grandchildren.
But it's so important that,
Yeah.
people our age and younger, because I'm 37. I think I'm 30. I'm pretty sure I'm 37. I was born in 1987. So I think I'm 37.
You'll
Maybe
be 38 soon.
my birthday is coming up. But it's so important because, I can read any book or take any training, but where I have learned the most is from those who have been working in this field for 30 years. They have a wealth of knowledge. They have experienced disaster since pre-Katrina all the way up, and where, this before pre-Stafford Act, pre back when they were making pre-Katrina mobile homes, so they can tell you the differences in quality before we had wind zone ratings on mobile homes. I can tell you that too because I'm a nerd.
I'm not that kind of a nerd, but I am.
I love insurance and I love mobile homes.
I think we also need to talk about the topic of what's the best way to plan your recovery if you are affected by a disaster.
Yes, that is freaking excellent topic.
Because I'm going to just say this here. If you're applying for like FEMA assistance or any other type of assistance, keep applying. A no doesn't necessarily mean a no. It means maybe you need to adjust your application.
Appeal. A no doesn't mean that you were denied assistance. It might just mean that you are missing like an insurance denial letter, or you didn't put the correct disaster number on your application. There are so many things that it means that's not a no.
Or even maybe this doesn't qualify for you for this, but if you apply again, you're going to have a different bucket of money available to you.
And different buckets of money come available at different times.
Yep.
And every organization that provides assistance has different timelines for providing that.
Yep.
So, it's not just important for you to know that. Like, maybe you have a friend that asks you that, because we can also talk about home fires, because those are a type of disaster too that, is
every single day,
heavily localized. I got my start in Red Cross doing the disaster action team responding to home fires. And I have, I don't want to say fond memories of doing that because it wore me out after a while, but it was one of my favorite things to provide that on-person support and just give the survivor a hug. Give them that individualized feeling. In-person DAT is one of the most amazing experiences that anybody can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say I am a big smoke detector nerd at this point too. I make jokes let me just say this. For my grandparents and my parents' Christmas presents, I went through their house and I installed smoke alarms because I was very upset to find out that my grandparents were using a smoke alarm from 2004, even though they had been changing the batteries on it, and they said it was good, and I tested it and it didn't work. And then they had a CO detector from 1996, and they were like, yeah, it's super good. It's in our guest bedroom, far away from everything. And I tried to turn it on and it was completely dead. And they're like, yeah, we've got it and it works great. So I fixed that for them. And I also made it so my mom has working smoke alarms in her home. By the way, 10-year lithium ion battery smoke alarms, top tier.
Top like tier.
Interconnected ones.
Yeah, if I have a fire in my kitchen and it goes off, well, then I want mine in my bedroom to go off before the fire blocks my hallway.
Yeah, definitely. But baseline, you need to get a 10-year lithium ion. Don't be changing your batteries every 6 months. Get one that's not going to have you to change your batteries every 6 months.
Yes, because you know what? As much as I like to say I change batteries and everything on daylight savings, no. I'm trying to wake up on daylight savings. I'm tired when the time changes.
I do not remember things. I think it probably might be chronic stress.
I have a brain tumor, so I don't remember things. I actually literally did get
This is a new development.
This is a new development, so this will also be part of our podcast, as I will probably have to step away from disaster for a while to get brain surgery. Yeah. I'll have plenty of time to work on the social media, though.
But she definitely, I mean, even if you're not actively in the field, there's a lot of great things you can be doing to support people who are in the field or are preparing to be in the field, because disaster is not one size fits all for what responders are doing or what the disaster looks like. And I think we've done our fair share of rambling here.
We've done a lot of rambling.
We have.
But it's because we're so excited and passionate about doing this and giving back to responders. There's so many podcasts about disasters and what happens and different
glamorization of people's trauma,
different theories. I love the podcast about no natural disasters. I'm a huge fan of disasterology. The book is incredible. At the end of the day, there's nothing about the responders or for the responders out there. So we are just really, really excited to give back to the community and recruit new people to the community, or give them the confidence that they need to join the community.
Yeah.
So
and to develop their skills into what you should be doing instead of what you are doing because you don't have any other idea of what you can do. Because
we'll highlight different opportunities, different nonprofits, different VOADs, different courses you can take.
So maybe share some personal experiences of things.
This is like a one-stop shop. So feel free to provide feedback, ask any questions that you have. We'll start doing a Q&A section at the end too, where we'll probably go through like 5 questions that show anything from what's it like on a disaster. We'll show hotel rooms.
She'll be doing more of that side. I'm not, but I might take you on a day on what my day looks like as a local person who manages an area in disaster, or manages disaster programming in an area that may not be actively impacted by, a big disaster or a tornado or whatever we're classifying it as.
100%. Whatever you guys want, that's what we're here for.
Or we're going to be aiming to give you guys what you want. But anywho, we're very glad that you guys were able to join us today for our very first podcast episode of The Responder Life. You can check us out on social media. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the links on the screen. And if you are joining us via your podcasting app of choice, you can find us in the show notes, and we'll make sure to get these out to you. You'll find us on all the forms of social media that are open at the moment. And we're going to try and build our community one person at a time, because the best way to change the world is one person at a time. And I couldn't be more excited to be working with y'all and sharing experiences and stories. And I look forward to chatting with y'all next time.
See you on the next disaster.